Okay, so again, I'm Bruce Agnew with the Transportation Accelerator, and this session is part of a track of 7 or 8 programs. We just started this morning with supply chains, and now we're going to continue the transportation discussion. We're going to broaden our focus a little bit and get into what is a very important piece of legislation to the Northwest. It's called the Transportation Reauthorization. You heard in the last session from Ted about going back in terms of federal transportation policy over the years. And we are engaged in halfway through the U.S. House of Representatives considering transportation policy for the future. We are just winding up the 4-year bipartisan infrastructure law under the Biden administration, which ended up totaling around $1.2 trillion of new transportation funding. And now we're engaged, and our Northwest congressional delegation is engaged in pretty deep consultation with stakeholders in the Northwest about what the new program should look like. So we're going to have a presentation on that, and then Representative Andrew Barkas, who is the ranking Republican on the House Transportation Committee, is going to set up the session and go through our speakers, and we're going to get into a deeper detail about innovative finance and project delivery with our partners at WSP. And we do have Colleen Giroux from Interjex, who will be presenting remotely. And we asked Colleen to interject and weave into the discussion about transportation, clean energy, and how it's delivered in Canada and the U.S. Because one of the hallmarks of what we're trying to do at Build Northwest Council with our partners in Lehigh and the energy program at PNWER is to figure out how we systemically integrate energy and transportation corridors. When you think about the PNWER region, we transport energy via transmission lines or pipelines or barges or rail or tanker cars, trucks, and we power transportation by different sources of energy. So you'd think that the two worlds would communicate. That's not always the case. The federal funding is usually siloed. The decision and planning process is separated, not integrated. So we're delighted to have Colleen speak to us about her visions of integrating that system. So just a couple other notes. We are recording this. We have a pretty robust remote audience. Unfortunately, some of our friends in Canada could not make it down here for various reasons. But we've got a pretty healthy audience, and we will be using the Whova application for questions. And if you don't know how to do that, if you look at the Whova app, or we can give you some information about how to download that app. It's a very efficient way, Andrew, to handle questions. So we'll turn that over to you. I also will mention that the result of this session will be amplified far beyond the folks that are in this room. We're going to be presenting or compiling a report about this transportation track, this transportation and trade track, starting this morning, continuing to tomorrow afternoon. And we'll be circulating that to our members of Congress, our governors, our state DOTs, our legislators, our Canadian partners at the federal, provincial, and local level. So what you say will be memorialized forever. And so just be careful. Okay, Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all here and virtually. My name is Andrew Barkas, state representative, representing the beautiful 2nd Legislative District in Washington State. And as Bruce alluded to, I've had the privilege and honor of working as the House ranking member on the House Transportation Committee now for, I think, 8 years. I don't know, time flies when you're having fun. All this gray hair here that was not here 10 years ago when I joined the legislature. Just a big shout out to Bruce, Tom, the whole staff at PNWER for once again putting on a great event, an informative event. Travel around the country at a lot of different conferences, and PNWER always puts on a very, very good event. but more so the information that you can gather here, especially with some of our fantastic panelists, information that you just can't get anywhere else. And so thank you again, Bruce, and everybody for putting this on. And so let's get going. So today we are really fortunate to be joined by some incredible panelists who are going to share with us some updates. We're going to talk about some of the finance and regulatory reform. We're going to talk about a little bit what's going on with the federal government. Someone who writes a pretty sizable budget now over the last several years and has faced budget challenges. I will use, I'm being nice with my words today. Budget challenges. And within our context between what we do at the state, local, and of course the federal level, how everything comes together. And more now than ever, this partnership with our federal partners on some of the things that are going on within the region, the PNWER region, state of Washington. Many important logistical projects, supply chain projects, as you just heard, and Bruce has alluded to when it comes to infrastructure, energy, et cetera. So it's going to be fantastic to hear that. I want to thank Interjex for being our sponsor today for this particular panel. We appreciate the support for PNWER. And with that, we're going to get going. So today we have with us Elaine Nessel, who is going to be opening up with some brief remarks. Elaine is Executive Director for Coalition of America's Gateways and Trade Corridors. We also have in person here Brent Baker, who is a Senior Vice President and Strategic Advisor for WSP, going to give us some good insight here. And then joining us virtually is Colleen Griot-Schmidt. She's the Senior Director in Government Relations and Regulatory Affairs at our sponsor, Interjex Renewable Energy, and she will be here. So let's get going. I know we have some opening remarks. I will skip going into these bios. If I just did the bios on our panelists, it would be lunchtime. Very impressive. So those are available both virtually with your agenda app. You can go get the speaker information. And of course, as you go through these, as you hear things, as we're here today, I always encourage you to find the panelists and have that conversation to get a little deeper if you have that. We will have some time after the presentations, a few questions I'll have, and then we'll have some questions from the audience and we'll wrap up. And with that, Elaine, take us away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. And it seems like this panel flows perfectly following the one that preceded it, which was about supply chain and touched so much on federal government involvement, et cetera. I also want to echo the thanks to the PNWER team, Bruce, Tom, Hannah, and Patty for doing such a lovely job on the event. And for including me. I'm so happy to be here. So I do have some PowerPoint slides that I am going to use. And while those are getting pulled up, oh, I'm getting the thumbs up to click. Which direction do I click? Nope. There we go. Okay, thank you. So anyway, the name of my organization, the Coalition for America's Gateways and Trade Corridors, it's quite a mouthful. And so what I have done is put together a slide. This is designed to be illustrative rather than exhaustive, but to help paint a picture of who our members are and what it includes. I want to give a special thanks to 3 of our members here in the room, PNWER, WSP, and AECOM. Thank you so much for your support. And as you can see, we've got a list of public and private agencies here, but all of these different agencies are united in working to educate the U.S. federal government on the need for strategic federal infrastructure investment in freight and supply chain infrastructure. And so that's what we've been working on for a long, long time. We've been around since 2001, and we would go in and talk about freight infrastructure, and lawmakers would say, you mean trucks? We'd say, no, we mean all of it. And they'd say, so you mean rail? We'd say, no, we mean all of it. But anyway, post-COVID, there is definitely a much higher dialogue and interest in learning about supply chain infrastructure. That is for sure. So I'm going to talk about surface transportation reauthorization, where we are and where we're heading. So in the United States, traditionally, we have surface transportation authorization bills that span perhaps 5 or 6 years. Sometimes they vary in length. I have seen a bill as short as 2 years. It had 2 years of funding and about 6 years of policy changes, which made for some interesting work in that period. The last surface transportation and infrastructure bill that we had was the largest to date by a long shot. It was $1 trillion of total investment. More than half of that was dedicated to transportation investment, and it was a 56% increase over previous law. I have to say that it has taken me a long time to train my mouth to talk about trillions instead of billions. When I first started doing this 20 years ago, I never thought that we would be talking trillions of dollars for infrastructure funding. But as I'm sure many of you know, what have we seen in those years since the IIJA was passed in 2021 is staggering inflationary increases. And so while the BIL or the IIJA, those terms are interchangeable, typically dependent on your political party. The BIL included a 56% surface transportation funding increase over the previous law. The Federal Highway Administration's cost construction index is showing that we've had a 59.3% cost inflation increase since 2021. So that means that we are pretty much breaking even despite that huge influx of cash. I'm not going to run through these programs one by one, but what I hope to convey is that for the first time ever, a lot of these programs that may have existed previously were put under one single transportation authorization package and given a guarantee of how long we would receive funding, because several of these programs were previously subject to an annual appropriation cycle. And so their livelihood from one year to the next was somewhat uncertain. But just to break down some of the acronym soup, PIDP is the Port Infrastructure Development Program. Infra is really for freight and also highway projects. Tiger Build and Raise is for pretty much any type of mobility project under the sun. It's a bit of a catch-all program for lumpy projects that don't fit nice and neatly into a formula program. And CRISI, which is a rail infrastructure program. And so all of these programs existed before, but they got more money under the IIJA. And they also, like I said, received guarantees on future funding. There were also a lot of new programs. There was a new bridge discretionary program, a new mega projects program, a new rail crossing elimination program, and a healthy ports initiative. These programs all received significant money. I think that they were long overdue. Frankly, we have not been investing enough as a nation in our transportation infrastructure for many years. And what happens in those years? Project costs go up and up and up. And it's really challenging to wrap your arms around these big mega projects that these programs are designed to fund. So the IIJA actually has some time left on it. It does not expire until the fall of 2026, September 30th of 2026 to be precise. And yet Congress is moving very fast. And there are a couple of reasons for that. The gentleman who is moving fastest is the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chairman, Sam Graves. He is aiming to pass a bill out of the House by the end of this year, which would be record speed. Usually Congress requires several extensions in between their authorizations because they are unable to pass things on time. Mr. Graves has a deadline that is very much at the center of his leadership. House Republicans have a 6-year term limit self-imposed on their leadership positions, and his is running out very soon. And so while he has the gavel, he would like to pass a bill. This year, the House did something really interesting that they've never done before, and they opened up portals through which you could submit your surface transportation authorization priorities. And so they opened up 2 portals, one for stakeholders and one for members in the House to submit their priorities. To date, they have received 11,000 submissions that they are sorting through as priorities to go into the next surface transportation authorization bill. Chairman Graves has spoken an awful lot about his interest in making sure that the bill is bipartisan and that it's driven by members of the House. His counterpart is Rick Larson from Washington State. I'll pause there and just say that the Pacific Northwest does have a powerhouse delegation when it comes to transportation infrastructure between Mr. Larson and also Senator Cantwell, who is the ranking member on the Senate Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over many of our freight transportation issues. And of course, Senator Patty Murray, who is a very highly placed appropriator. So there's much to be proud of as the Pacific Northwest and feel optimistic about, because you do have a powerhouse delegation that is deep in this process. Congressman Graves, for his part, has also talked a lot about a return to a traditional surface transportation authorization. Following the IIJA, there was some level of criticism, particularly on the part of Republicans, that it included too many different types of infrastructure, and that the allowable expenses included were not in line with federal interests. And so they would like to see a rollback of that. Of course, the Republicans do control both the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so I think it's quite likely that that's what we'll see in the next iteration. For the Senate side, they're also working quite quickly. The EPW committee, which has jurisdiction over highways and bridges, is chaired right now by Shelley Moore Capito. She has talked a lot about an interest in consolidating the programs that exist. I ran through 2 slides of discretionary grant programs. Her committee is working fast to see which programs have overlaps and redundancies that can be consolidated so that there are fewer programs. Her committee has also spoken a great deal about their interest in increasing the percentage of federal funding going to state DOTs and decreasing the percentage of funding going to local governments. So that's another interest there. Senate Commerce Committee Senate Commerce Committee is chaired by Ted Cruz, and his committee is they have jurisdiction over railroads and also multimodal freight issues. And so his committee has said that they're very interested in moving a pipeline reauthorization bill prior to working on surface transportation reauthorization. The administration just last week rolled out its own priorities for a surface transportation reauthorization, and they held a get together at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and that terrible picture is courtesy of yours truly. The administration has said that their priorities going into the next reauthorization include enhancing safety, accelerating delivery, increasing opportunities, and strengthening partnerships. The Department of Transportation published a request for information in yesterday's Federal Register seeking input from the public on what you would like to see in the next surface transportation authorization proposal. And so that is going to be open for a few more weeks. I'm going to put an asterisk on the second bullet, accelerate delivery, and say that that is probably the area in which we will see the most language on from the administration. That is certainly the area under which they have expressed the most interest in. During the event last week, when they rolled this out, they spoke a lot about an interest in delegating more NEPA authority to states and having less federal involvement in that process with the goal of advancing projects quicker. All right, now I'm going to throw cold water on all of this. This is from the Eno Center for Transportation, which is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. They do fabulous work. They're bipartisan. They're very well respected, and they know the numbers much better than I do. So I am borrowing their graphic that they used. This is the Highway Trust Fund receipts and expenditures. So the red squiggly line at the top is the spending. The green bar that is running just below the red line would be the general fund transfer. So that is the amount of money that the federal government has bailed out because the Highway Trust Fund was collecting less money than Congress was authorizing to be spent on transportation infrastructure. I'm going to pause there. Why is that? I am 41 years old and I was in third grade the last time the federal motor fuels taxes were increased. It probably, frankly, will not happen again in my lifetime because we are just moving away from motor fuels. Cars are becoming more fuel efficient. And so there is a diminishing value in increasing those taxes, especially when you think of it from a political risk perspective. But nevertheless, they are still. Oh, so sorry, I've stepped in it already. Well, anyway, some people have more courage. We'll put it that way. Okay. So what's interesting here is we see the arrow that says we are here, and that's FY25. The IIJA runs out in FY26, but that funding doesn't run out for another year or two because there was enough money made in transfers to the Highway Trust Fund by Congress that would extend beyond the IIJA. There's also more money going into the Highway Trust Fund because of high interest rates. And so the interest earned on the balance. And so there is this huge rush by Congress to quickly try and reauthorize legislation. But it's interesting because this will be the first time in my experience that we actually have money that extends beyond the law. And so that does provide a little bit of a cushion there. And so if, let's say, Congress gets hung up on issues related to the midterm elections or anything that may get in the way of Congress, which lots of things do, they have a little bit of a cushion there for an extension. And so that's one element that could be working against this. But we still have a big problem as soon as we get to FY28. The money is far below that red line, and there has not been an identified long-term solution for filling in that hole beyond general fund transfers, which frankly is one way of doing things. But some members of Congress would like to see more of a return to a user fee-based model that's shoring up the trust fund. So after I've dumped that bucket of cold water, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to brighten the mood again. Thank you.
All right. Well, nobody left. They're still engaged. Fascinating slide. I think that is parallels. Ladies and gentlemen, the chair of the Transportation Committee, Representative Jake Fye, my great colleague and friend, parallels what we're seeing in Washington State. The declining revenues, the backfill, first time ever, the general fund backfilling some of the transportation, and then they borrowed it back, which was kind of interesting. But okay, the next one, we good technically, we're going to bring on our next panelist to enlighten us with some more, and that would be Colleen Rio-Schmidt, and she's coming in virtually. Are we all good to go technically on that? Technical people, all good? All right. Good morning, Colleen. Can you hear us? Are you with us? Your name is on the screen. Your microphone.
All right, can you hear me?
The most common words uttered during the virtual session. You're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, how we doing? You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, it's a little bit of a challenge. We can pivot. I'm good at pivoting, but Colleen, can you talk? Can you speak to us?
Good
We're in
morning,
thrall,
everybody.
waiting. Oh,
Can you hear
something's
me?
happening here.
Good morning.
Admit.
Hello, good morning. Good morning.
No worries. Well, you could have gone a little longer, Lane. Maybe we should start asking you questions now.
I was going to ask you while we're. Now I'm the one with the technical difficulties. I was going to ask you because I know that I heard some chuckles about increasing a gas tax. I was going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about how that happened in the state of Washington and what we could learn at the federal level, how you got it done.
Well, it was, there have been conversations happening for several years. We have been facing the same thing. I think it was a very interesting statistic that you showed, 59%. I think we were seeing bids coming in anywhere from 40 to 70, sometimes even beyond 80% higher than what we had just appropriated 6 to 8 months. So there was a package that was done, Move Ahead, a couple of years ago, using our Climate Commitment Act, which is our cap and trade money proceeds, but it's very restrictive on how those funds can be used. And they don't apply to general road projects. That's our gas tax, our traditional revenue sources. So the discussion came up about the gas tax. I was not surprised. It was challenging because in the state of Washington, we had an overall discussion about taxes this year because we were in such dire straits for a myriad of reasons. But in the end, it was settled on 6 cents. And for the first time ever, actually indexed to inflation, which was also a very controversial conversation. Not sure what the final vote on off the floor of the House was. Guess where my vote was? It was a little bit challenging. The challenge was that knowing full well, because I write the budget with my colleague and our great staff, revenue is needed. And so we had to have that conversation. Politically voting for a gas tax is very toxic on my side. But we were able to do that. Through the conversation, though, I do see us moving towards alternative revenue, road usage charge, actually a highway user fee, which is something that was brought to us late in session that we had incorporated into our discussions, which I do support in the context of how we were going to move forward on that. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the final process, but I have a feeling it'll be back next year as we look at long-term sustainable revenue sources. So, but it is always surprising to me. I think it was 1996, if I'm remembering the year, when the last time the feds raised
93.
Okay,
Yeah.
so 3. So that's shocking that is such a political third rail that they don't touch the gas tax. When you think about how low the federal gas tax and how much responsibility that's absorbed by the states, why wouldn't they? Even as we've done, knowing full well it's declining, it's still not declining to the point where it doesn't bring in revenue, as that graph shows. Do you really think they will never do that in our lifetime?
My short answer is yes, but I see we've got Colleen queued up, so I think.
There she is.
So I think
She's out in the Winfield somewhere.
I got caught up at the border, but I've made it through now, so I'm here.
She got caught. Well, welcome and thank you for being here. We would love to have you here with us in person, but we're glad that we were able to get you technically. I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation, and then we'll have you hang out. We'll have some questions when we get done with all the presentations. Okay.
Sounds good. So I will just try to navigate technology here to share. There we go. Can you see? All right, so I'll start talking. My side says the presentation is being shared, so hopefully it gets to you as I'm talking. So Colleen Giroux-Schmidt, I'm the Senior Vice President of Development for Western Canada and Federal Government Affairs for Interjex Renewable Energy. Interjex is a 30-year-old now Canadian-founded renewable energy developer, owner, operator. We have 91 facilities that operate around the globe, including a portfolio that spans across Canada, across the United States, in France, and in Chile. Our portfolio represents hydroelectricity, wind, solar, and battery energy storage projects, and it's over 4.6 gigawatts of installed capacity. So pretty significant, and we're growing rapidly. The next key part about Interjects I just wanted to highlight for context is our vision as a corporation. We believe in a better world where abundant renewable energy promotes healthier communities and creates and enables shared prosperity. We're committed to this vision by leveraging our long-term commitment, our expertise, our entrepreneurial spirit, and our innovative approach while we balance people, our planet, and prosperity. Meaning that projects that are long-term infrastructure investments should help the communities around them while generating prosperity and protecting our planet. Now, the meat of what we wanted to talk about today being transportation. So as a Canadian developer with 3 wind projects currently advancing here in British Columbia, I'm here to emphasize something we all know, but too often pushed to the margins in our brains. Transportation is no longer a background logistical issue. It is now critical path dependency for energy development. And because the energy transition is inherently binational and our supply chains are integrated and our ports and delivery systems are integrated, our solutions must also cross borders. To put this challenge into perspective, a single wind turbine blade that we're transporting is 295 feet long. That's nearly the length of a football field. It weighs 72,000 pounds and stands about 13 feet high when it's on its transport rig. These aren't just components, they're mobile infrastructure requiring custom routing, specialized haulers, and regulatory approvals through numerous jurisdictions. While the provinces and states work hard within their borders, we're still lacking a coordinated binational framework for oversized clean energy shipments. In both countries, project developers often find out too late that the permits are filed by the OEMs, which is our acronym in the industry for the turbine manufacturers who are responsible for delivering the blades to the site. But those permits are filed near the end of the development cycle, which risks route denials and can impact critical path. Municipalities impose inconsistent movement restrictions, some banning travel during school hours, others limiting nighttime movement, which again can severely impact your critical path supply chain. Federal and state provincial authorities give unclear or conflicting guidance on responsibilities and have overlap or uncoordinated regulatory frameworks. This fragmentation adds risk, increases cost, and discourages private investment in an era where we need to be accelerating project delivery, not delaying it. Here in Canada, we're advocating for a provincial transportation coordinator, a centralized authority modeled on BC's new energy regulator to manage routing, permitting, and real-time coordination. But the same principle applies in the US. Decentralized permitting equals delayed projects. What we need is a cross-border transportation working group for clean energy infrastructure, one that includes states, provinces, federal agencies, and industry to align standards, timelines, and approvals. The private capital is ready to invest. What it needs is certainty. Transportation delays increase risk, which raises the cost of capital or deters investment altogether. We can't achieve our energy superpower goals in North America if a project's critical path depends on whether a city-level permit for a turning radius clearance on Everett Avenue connects properly to an I-5 superload permit. If we're serious about innovative finance and public-private partnerships, we need to build trust into this process, and that starts with predictable, coordinated transportation planning. We already share electricity and power. Let's share purpose. The clean energy build-out is a North American imperative, and it will only succeed if we treat transportation not as an afterthought, but as the backbone of delivery. And we want to make sure that our border doesn't become a barrier. And the other thing I wanted to highlight quickly is around project permitting as another key pathway where we can improve and accelerate infrastructure build-out. To use British Columbia as an example again, currently 98% of the power generated in BC comes from cleaner renewable resources, making BC a leader in North America when it comes to clean energy. Electricity demand in BC is expected to increase by 15% or more between now and 2030, and the government of British Columbia's recent decision to remove the formal environmental assessment process for renewable energy projects is a forward-thinking approach that will enhance regulatory efficiency, improve project timelines, and foster greater collaboration with Indigenous and local communities while maintaining a robust environmental review process through the BC Energy Regulator. And let me be clear, this didn't remove oversight of what's important to us as citizens. There will still be robust environmental protection, robust community consultation, and all local, Indigenous, and provincial decision makers have a seat at the table. What this has done is streamline some of the bureaucratic inefficiency that inherently and inevitably slips into our processes when we have regulations and laws that have built up over decades and multiple decision makers in the process. As a final comment before leaving this for the discussion, I'd like to invite us to take a step backwards and reflect on how we think about infrastructure and government's role in it. Most of our government structures in North America were built in the 18th and 19th centuries. We had a very different economy then and different kinds of societal problems that we needed to address. Today, in 2025 and beyond, we're looking at wicked problems that are cross-cutting across different ministries and agencies. Our government structure needs to get out of its silos and be able to respond more nimbly to address the challenges at hand. When we think about infrastructure, we also have to stop thinking about next year or the next 5 years. What we're investing in today is the critical backbone that will enable our societies to have success and thriving economies decades into the future. And so we need to imagine and think about what is that economy and infrastructure need going to be in 2050, in 2080, in 2100, and make sure that the investments we're making today will set us up for future success. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And boy, you prompted, I'm sure, a lot of questions with some of those statistics, and that we will come back to you. So hang out with us for a little bit longer. And we're now going to move quickly to Brent Baker, who is going to share some remarks with us, and then we'll get into some questions.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Brent, and I'm a Senior Vice President with WSP USA. WSP is a global engineering consultancy of about 70,000 people worldwide. I've spent the bulk of my 3-decade career in the financial planning of transportation infrastructure. And that work has basically been helping owners and agencies figure out how to pay for expensive stuff. This includes understanding and forecasting what construction costs will be in the future, so that we have an accurate or more accurate estimate of what those costs will be in their year of expenditure. It also includes looking at and forecasting revenue sources from various taxes, fees, tolls, user fees, to determine how they can be best leveraged for upfront capital investments, and working with owners to match those sources and uses of funds. And I think we've heard Elaine and Colleen tee up some interesting questions around sort of the future of funding and some of the regulatory reform. So I'm going to try to set up a couple of scenarios here for you, and maybe offer some bold statements or questions to spark some healthy discussion here today. And with the goal of getting to those green lights that this title of this session is intended to address. I see us today at a point of sort of this yellow cautionary light. And when you're driving and you see a yellow light, you're thinking two things. Do I need to stop and wait, or do I need to hit the gas and try to get through, right? So, either may apply here, but that's kind of where I see we're at today. So let's talk for a moment first about things on the contracting and delivery side of things, because we haven't heard as much about that yet. And then we'll come back to sort of the paying for it question that Elaine teed up so well. So from the delivery standpoint of new and improved transportation infrastructure, whether you're an owner, like being an agency or local jurisdiction, or you're a contractor, doesn't matter what side of that equation you're on, you want economic stability and you want to minimize uncertainty. Stable, predictable prices for equipment, construction materials, and labor result in competitive contract bids for delivering infrastructure. And by competitive, meaning that both parties feel like it's a fair deal, and you get multiple bidders showing up, and they are in line with owners' own expectations and estimates beforehand. During the pandemic, we saw the result of tremendous supply chain disruptions that resulted in high inflation in not everything, but in a lot of construction costs, as Elaine noted with FHWA's National Highway Cost of Construction Index. And now we're in a situation where there are other disruptions in our, call it global trade skirmishes, call it tariffs, and their impacts on prices, but there are things that are continuing to be disruptors in the marketplace. And including workforce constraints on the outlook for labor supply. And those are risks, whether real or perceived or just threats. Contractors are embedding those risks into their pricing. And that is why we're seeing higher bids, higher than expected bids. And because it's that uncertainty that they are trying to deal with, and particularly where owners are looking for design build delivery, which is where the owners take it to a particular point of design, and then that design, the rest of the design of the infrastructure is turned over to the contractor, and the owner gets sort of a turnkey price to finish design and then construct. That is putting a lot of risk on those contractors when the cost of labor and materials is uncertain over what may be a multi-year, even decade-long investment. So one of the big questions I would like to pose here is, how can we reestablish stability and certainty in the marketplace for infrastructure delivery? And I think that's at both the federal level and at the local and regional level. So I'm going to toss that one out. We'll get back to it. Now let's shift slightly to the funding side, the paying for it, the show me the money part of the equation, if you will. We just heard from Colleen about transportation infrastructure in Canada. And I think her thoughts remind me of the fact that transportation is an economic good. What does that mean? People and businesses derive enormous benefits from transportation. However, those transportation assets, whether they're spaces on a roadway, spaces on a cargo ship, or a train, or a bus, you name it, they're finite. And they are at the risk, when demand is at its peak, of being overconsumed. And when they're overconsumed, they're congested, there are delays, people wait. Time lost waiting in congested travel is lost forever. That time is never back and never available to do something again. And so why does that occur? Well, one could argue that the prices of travel, the cost of travel, which for an individual, let's say making a trip to come to this conference, if you were driving, it is your time cost and your cost of operating that vehicle to get here. And those costs don't fully reflect all of the market forces at play. They don't reflect, for example, the cost that your own travel decisions have on adding a little bit to the congestion of the highway that causes a little bit of delay, say, for everybody else, or in the case of when it's stop and go, maybe a little bit more than a little bit. So this is where some of the innovative funding solutions come into play. Now, I had planned on talking quite a bit about the federal gas tax, but I think we've covered that already. Let me just say that while I don't disagree with some of my esteemed panelists here on the likelihood that the federal gas tax will get increased in my lifetime, I would certainly, I'm still hopeful. We need to find a sustainable way at the federal level to pay for infrastructure and stop tapping the general fund and adding to our deficit spending. And I hope that maybe even if it takes a grassroots effort, that we might get some support for our congressional delegations to consider at least doing what Washington State did this year, which is to index the gas tax to inflation. So we could take that 18.4 cents per gallon for motor vehicles, gas, or I guess it's 24.4 cents for diesel. And if we can't stomach raising it, maybe our congressional delegations can stomach at least indexing it. So it goes up a little bit a year on an automatic basis with CPI. But what are those other innovative funding solutions? There are lots of financial tricks that allow you to sort of squeeze more out of borrowing and do a little bit more with what you've got. And we'll talk about some of those. But at the end of the day, we still need, additional funds. And this is where I think the discussion is turning toward more user fee based. If you're using the facilities, then you're paying for it. And so things that are more user fee oriented, whether it be road usage charges or tolling or road pricing, however you want to think about it, they have sort of two benefits. One, they do provide a critical and sustainable source of capital funding. So if users are paying more, or if you're being charged a toll to use on a road, or you're being charged per mile for your travel in whatever kind of energy your vehicle uses, you're paying as you go, and that money is available to contribute to not only operations and maintenance, but provide capital funding. But secondly, they also help to serve to sort of correct some of those market forces for the use of that space that's being consumed in travel. So whether it's space on a roadway, on an airplane, on a ship, whatever you think of it, roadway is probably the most common one to talk about where the market forces aren't fully aligned, that's sort of underpriced and overconsumed. User fees, tolls, road usage charges, they help to put that a little bit more into alignment, which makes those roads operate better, particularly when they're variably priced by time of day. So the price is a little bit higher in the peak period, causes some of those discretionary trips that could travel at a lower cost time to choose to do so. And the trips that need to stay there, and everybody benefits because the facility is running smoother. It's less overconsumed, if you will. So my second bold question here, and this is sort of addressed to all of us, are we willing to pay the market price for green light transportation? And what are the public's concerns with doing this? I mean, somebody's going to have to pay. As the Eno slide that Elaine showed, there's a tremendous gap between what we'd like to spend on transportation infrastructure at the federal level and available funds in the Highway Trust Fund, and the difference has to be made up with general fund transfers, and that is also can be politically challenging. So what are the concerns with sort of paying more and getting users to sort of think about this like the way they might think about other things like a utility bill or something, where it is it's more of a user fee basis? And how can those concerns be alleviated so that policymakers can carry those steps forward? So I will pause there. I know that there are some other questions embedded in there, but this is probably a great time to get a little bit of discussion with the audience.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. Man, so much to unpack, and we're going to watch this time. I know we have some questions that have come in through this, but as the moderator, I'm going to use discretion, and I have some questions. So thank you again, all of you, for being here. And we'll try to be concise, but I know we could probably go down a rabbit hole on any one of these particular questions. But I want to start, Elaine, with you. When you were talking about these different things in the policy changes, you touched on NEPA reform and some of these reforms. I believe in my work that I've seen in the legislature, I said this, and I was quoted saying, there is no amount of money we can throw at this problem without taking significant reforms in the regulatory, in the environmental, and the other things. Do you see that these are actually going to come into play and maybe take the timeframes down in some of this so that we have more predictability with the revenue that we have to carry these things out?
I do. I think that NEPA reform, permitting, even funding delivery to projects, these are all such, someone talked about a Gordian knot earlier. This is a Gordian knot, if there ever was one. All of these processes are interconnected. And I think that for the first time, maybe we are starting to see some interest on both sides of the political spectrum in making reforms to NEPA, particularly as we're talking about looking at permitting clean energy projects and things like that. And so how do we advance that? I think that it could be in manageable bites, frankly, rather than a huge overhaul, because it is really difficult to see. It takes a long time to see the progress, but I do think that the last administration actually made progress on this order. I think this administration has and will continue to make progress on this order, but I think that it's in manageable bites rather than a one-time overhaul of the NEPA process.
Great. And just to piggyback on that, Colleen, you said that actually in BC, in the province, you actually have put that into play, some of these reforms, especially when it comes to citing some of the clean energy. I don't remember what you said in the time frame by which, but can you briefly elaborate and let us know if it's actually working, if it's actually, what has it done to condense that time frame or streamline? And maybe just as an example of something took 8 years before, what is it now we're projecting it to take to get to that point?
I might have to come join you to answer that in about 3 years, because they've just passed the legislation this last spring session. So we're living at real time right now. But the hope is that it will remove a year or two of process off of the projects moving through the regulatory process here in the province. So, and again, it's not changing the requirements of the valued ecosystem components that have to be considered and studied in the consultation. That work is all happening at the same rigor it did before, but what it's removing is duplicative process. And I think to take a step back as well, all of us involved in permitting, so whether you're an elected official or a public policy maker and a bureaucrat or a proponent working in it, we need to reflect on why are we permitting this? What is the purpose of issuing the permit? What is the public need that we're protecting by doing this, and the value of going through the exercise? And I think we've, again, accumulated over our decades and centuries here of governance, a lot of process that isn't adding a lot of value to what we need to achieve as society today. And there's a lot of space for optimization.
Great. Well, I think Bruce is making arrangements to bring you back in that time frame so we can actually see if it's working. Because I know that in my years coming to this conference and then working in policy, it is probably the single biggest area that we have to look at is how are we going to do this? If we have time, I'm going to come back to you on transmission of that incredible power that you're generating, because I know that I remember distinctly in Montana, having a conversation about how difficult it is. You can make all the power, but you can't get it to the end user because, again, that permitting and land use and everything else to do that. So hold that. Brent, in your comments, just to go a little bit deeper, I think it's interesting that you posed a question, and can you give examples when you say, are people willing to pay? This is a political conversation we always have, right? And my thought is people are willing to pay that if they receive something for that, what they're paying. I think our problem here, especially in our state and in others, and maybe even federal, is that you pay, but you're not necessarily seeing the delivery. When you're working on that concept and you're consulting, how are you seeing that manifest where people are saying, yes, we're willing to pay that? What are the key components to that delivery? If that makes sense. It's kind of a little ramble, but
I'll give it a try. Thanks. I mean, nobody, let's be honest, if we're talking, nobody wants to pay taxes or tolls. And I think, Representative Marcus hit right on the nose here. It's like people want to see what they get. Once they understand what they get from it, then it's better. But oftentimes pain starts well before the benefits can be delivered. And that's just the nature of infrastructure. And of course, you borrow money to try to accelerate that. We try to improve, processes to get through regulations, environmental, whatever, to get that done sooner. But, at the end of the day, it still takes a lot of time. I will say I've seen polling done on toll road projects where the public is polled ahead of time about tolling. And as you might imagine, it's highly unfavorable. And then after the project has been delivered and people are paying the tolls and they recognize the travel time savings, the reliability, the predictability of their trip making with that, and they start to see the benefits of the new infrastructure that, say, the tolling pays for, then it flips around and there is a large advantageous time, period there are results in the polling. The challenge is that there, how do you shorten the time between having to implement or talking about the ideas or getting the public on board to the time of getting there? And I think, that's where some of this regulatory reform is going to come into play. I will just maybe use an example on one project to sort of tying a little bit this together and sort of willingness to pay. We are gone are the days where it was a project is just funded by one source, whether it be the feds or state gas tax or what have you. Funding for projects has gotten more complicated and more potpourri. I mean, I don't think it's quite yet at the point of bake sales and car washes, but it's getting pretty close. And I'd like to use the Puget Sound Gateway program here in Washington as an example. So that is 2 corridor completion projects. There are new expressways extending existing routes, SR 509 and 167 here in the central Puget Sound region. They're very freight oriented, connecting the marine ports of Seattle and Tacoma and the SeaTac airport air freight to the rest of the highway network, to warehousing in the Canarvon Valley, for drayage movements and everything else, connecting all throughout the rest of the country with the port trade travel, as well as providing new alternative connections for regular road use. So the legislature and the Connecting Washington package, if I recall correctly, in 2016 put together much of the funding for the Puget Sound Gateway program. But tolls were also part of the legislative direction there. These were new roads, so we do not have this sort of problem of toll diversion. We've got this problem like how do we attract people to these roads, but paying for it as part of by use, user pay, I guess, is part of the equation. But I think the most interesting thing about the funding that was assembled there is that the legislature, and I'm seeing folks here in the room that were probably part of this, also encouraged or basically required that local partners and local jurisdictions contribute some funding too. There was a goal of $130 million of the project to come from local partners. So that would be cities, counties, the 2 ports themselves, and also seeking federal grant money. So an infra grant was part of that project as well. So long and short of it, I think the willingness improves if you're spreading the burdens around across lots of different stakeholders, parties, interests to get there. And that's really the trend we're seeing in major transportation infrastructure, is that particularly when it's a big capital project, is that you're going to have to rely on everything, right, almost down to the bake sales.
All right. Well, hopefully we've got some good bakers in here. So, okay. A couple more questions. These coming in from our people who are participating. I'll just throw it out, and if it's a speed round, so quick answer, but pick up your mic, you two. Here's one. It says any thoughts on broader use of P3, public-private, or also Canada's use of alliance contracting? We're also seeing more infrastructure projects delivered using progressive design build to better manage risk, cost certainty, and collaboration. Any thoughts on that?
I'll jump right in on that. 2 quick things. Definitely progressive design build is where we see things are going, or GCCM, which is General Contractor Construction Manager, things that take out of that design build picture that I expressed earlier and try to share some of those risks more equally between the owners and the contractors is a vehicle for providing more stability and additional, getting additional contractors to be interested in bidding. So most certainly there.
Any other thoughts?
What was the first part of that one again?
Same thing, P3s.
Oh, and the only thing I would say on P3s is that the P3 that involves private financing brings, private sector can sometimes bring to the table. In the United States, tax exempt financing makes it attractive for the public sector to do the financing, but sometimes the private sector can bring a financing structure that is more efficient to the table. I know that's very common in BC where projects are required to at least be evaluated for P3 use. But one of the challenges, at least here in Washington State, is that our P3 laws do not allow for private financing to be part of like a design, build, finance, operate, maintain P3. So there, I think there are a lot of areas where P3s can help, but they're not necessarily free money. So not necessarily always a silver bullet.
I would just add to that. I think that, you know, with my freight hat on, I think that freight projects are excellent for P3s. There are a lot of creative things that can be done in the freight space using a P3 model. I also think that there are steps that the federal government can take to incentivize those P3s. We've talked about NEPA. I want to talk a little bit about funding delivery, which is different from project delivery and permitting. Funding delivery is really pertaining to when a public applicant receives notice from the federal government that they have been successful in receiving an award. They then have to enter into a grant agreement with the federal government in order to receive their money. That process can take years. And if you are the private P in the P3, you want to know that you are going to be receiving a return on your investment in some guaranteed period of time. When something as simple as just finalizing a competitive grant agreement adds months and years to a timeline, that disincentivizes the private sector contributions because, again, they want to have the return on their capital in a guaranteed timeframe. So things like the federal government issuing template grant agreements when they make award notices and getting ahead of that process, putting a shot clock on when that grant agreement shall be signed, which is a shared responsibility between the public agency and the federal government. Those can all go a long ways in helping to give the private company and the private capital the assurances that they need to participate.
Great. Colleen, the same question had, and maybe for the audience too, it talks about alliance contracting. Can you expand a little bit on that, if that makes sense?
Not my area of expertise, but I did have a comment on the
Okay, go ahead.
model and something we're increasingly seeing in the energy system in Canada, how it's being built out as projects now that are co-owned by the Indigenous nation or a community with a private sector developer like Interjax. And that's helping projects get the certainty they need to be able to go forward as we're working through economic reconciliation and the implementation of the legislation across Canada now, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so I think, again, taking a step back, we have a lot of built-in perspectives on it's better to be public sector, it's better to be private sector, and certain pieces of infrastructure, we feel more strongly about those from how our system has evolved and recognizing what we have in front of us today as an aging system, whether it's the electricity grid or our transportation system that desperately needs investment, as we saw earlier. We have a need to get everybody to the table to be able to build out rapidly. And so looking at what are the strengths we each bring, government low-cost capital and the ability to have the taxpayers' purse there to enable projects. Private sector has access to capital and can move faster, and nations and communities have the ability to help bring that local knowledge, expertise, and accelerate social acceptability. And so re-looking at how we put these partnerships together and what the value each party brings is critical as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Just one last question, just to kind of end what you were talking about. When in this part of the reform that we're seeing from the administration federally, one of the things that we hear and when we were looking through is how complex, you just talked about months, years, potentially in grants. And are they looking at revising that? I mean, we had a program in Washington State where we actually went to an ability for the federal, like a swap, to use state funds as opposed to federal because it's so complicated. Do we see that coming into play as this moves forward, where they might reduce some of that bureaucracy and complication to get these things moving faster? That funding piece is so important.
Yeah, I think that's always the goal. I think that part of the challenge here is that particularly when we're talking about freight projects, they are really complicated. And so they do require a flexible approach to funding them from the federal level. And so as soon as you build in flexibility, unfortunately, that does allow for room for different administrations to put in their own priorities as layers on the process. And everybody does it. And I don't think it's a Democrat issue. I don't think it's a Republican issue. I think that both parties use those opportunities to layer on their own personal agenda items. And so what we have now is a backlog of projects, which is probably what you're referencing. And that's for a couple of different reasons. As a federal government, we cannot turn the faucet on full speed and then off, and then full speed and then off when it comes to funding, because it takes time to develop the staff resources and expertise at the U.S. Department of Transportation in order to administer money to these really complicated projects. And so I think that the last administration started out at a disadvantage. The faucet went on full blast with very little advance warning, and they had to staff up really quickly to distribute unprecedented amounts of funding. And they also included their own initiatives, things related to DEI, things related to making a greener system. Now we have a new administration, and they have completely different priorities. And so they are stripping the initiatives related to DEI and greener transportation systems. And we'll begin to see, as they release more of their notices of funding opportunity, what their preferences will be. I think we'll see words like innovation, innovative project delivery. What can you show us you've done at the local level to be innovative? And so they'll be adding on those types of priorities. I've lost track of your original question because I just got on my soapbox.
There is no better answer than when you lose track of the question.
Yeah.
We're professionals at doing that. So
Next question, please.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up just real quick. I want to give each panelist just a quick 1 minute final closing thought. We'll start with you, Colleen.
Sure. I think if we leave today with anything, it's that we have a big deficit in funding for critical infrastructure, whether it's the electricity grid or transportation pathways. They're necessary for enabling the economic growth we need to go through here in North America. We need to think differently than how we've thought in the past and bring new partners to the table and be creative so we set up the continent for success going forward.
Great.
Okay. If for anyone who was in the room for the previous panel, they talked about collaboration across industries. I think that continues to be really important. And I think that as transportation enthusiasts and advocates, we need to make the case for why this is so critical, not just for today's generation, but for tomorrow's. And that's a responsibility held by everyone.
You bet. Brent?
I think no disagreement with what others have said. I would concur with that. And I would add that, I talked a bit about stability and reducing uncertainty. And I think those go hand in hand with finding common ground across different interests and sort of focusing on civility and patience. And so if we can maintain those things, I think we can do anything.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank my panelists. This has been outstanding for joining today. One of the key takeaways just sticks in my mind, the yellow light or the green light, right? I'm more of the guy that steps on the gas when we got to get there. So I think that's where we're at. I think that's the takeaway from here. We need to look at the different things that we're putting forth. This is a great platform to be able to have those collaborative ideas to tackle these very complex issues. So Bruce, thank you for the opportunity to moderate this. Thank you for allowing me to join you today, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Colleen, can you stay online for a little bit? Because we're going to take a team picture and you're larger than life in this picture. Thank you, everybody. At 12:15, we are serving lunch. It's a buffet lunch, so you want to get in line. Jake, you are one of the moderators, so you are sitting at the head table. So you might want to, we can take care of your lunch, so don't worry about that. We're very excited about the lunch program. As I indicated earlier, we have the CEO of the World Shipping Council. It came out from Washington, D.C. He's actually a graduate of Bellevue High School, which is kind of cool. And we have Northwest Seaport and Port of Vancouver and Washington Council of International Trade. And then again, continuing our track, this afternoon, we're going to focus on the Cascadia corridor. We're going to be looking at trucking. We're going to be looking at clean energy projects. We're going to be talking to our Canadian neighbors about trade and transportation corridors in Canada. And then culminating this afternoon in a really interesting session on the Amtrak Cascades and Burlington Northern Santa Fe developments with technology and a look to the future with high-speed rail. So stay with us and let's do a picture up here real quick. Thank you.